Ken, you're speaking first today. I'm gonna.
No, I didn't want the tariffs conversation.
Why?
Come
It's not a
on,
difficult one.
this is interesting conversation though. Come on.
No, there's a lot of topics you could talk about today, just like how people communicate to each other, and from a professional standpoint, there's just a lot you could discuss. But it also tells me there's a lot of stress out there.
Do you mind to wrap up that? Or hold on, let me do the very quick introduction and then
No,
we're
no, no,
gonna
no, no,
wrap that
no,
up.
no,
Yes,
no,
yes,
no,
yes,
no,
yes,
no,
yes,
no,
yes,
no, no, no. We're
yes.
not going there.
Of
No,
course
no,
we do.
no.
Of
Well, now
course
he's
we
on
Oh
the
do.
no.
point again.
I
Oh
did my research.
yes.
I did my research on tariffs, right? So I was trying to prepare myself for today. We're not
Okay.
going.
Of course we're going that way. You've just told me that you have enough of that. So why do you need to
You go
do
look at my
research?
LinkedIn. You're going to look at my LinkedIn post first. So
I can do that simultaneously. No worries at all.
no, 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 no.
Yes,
We're
yes,
not
yes,
talking
yes,
about
yes, yes.
communication right now. We're just not. No, I'm not going there.
All right.
He's
Okay.
dangerous.
Okay. No problem. No problem. We are not talking about communication right now. We're going to talk about tariffs and then about communication. Well, I'm going to read your article. Ta da! Problem
I'm
solved.
in. I was actually in the process of posting it. So give me a minute.
So there you go. That's why Ken will talk about tariffs. And I'm
Then
going to
right
read you a
away.
post. So there you go. Ain't no rest for the
I
wicked.
didn't want this topic.
We'll check that out. Come on. You do have years of experience, yada yada yada. So you do
Yada
not
yada yada,
need
but not
any
on tariffs.
preparations.
Tariffs
Well,
is one of those big things. It's kind of like economic policy. There's so many variations of theme and
I
so many opinions
know. And
about it.
and without specific numbers, it is so hard and after mass, it is very hard to say something, but still it is very important topic and there are a lot of friction around it and still a lot of political, I'd say, waves around it. So anyways, let me do the brief intro and we will try to dive into that. All right. Hello, everybody. Yes, this is roundtable number 3. And I'm still surrounded by this amazing, handsome, and very smart gentleman. Huh? How I'm doing, folks? Good, right? Mark and Ken. So if you like what we're doing here, let us know. If you'd like us to talk about some topics, let us know. So here we are. Today we're gonna try to talk about tariffs and communication, whether Mark like it or not. Haha. Yes, I'm being evil today. Okay, tariffs. We've tried to talk about that topic during our previous roundtable. We didn't have enough time, and I don't know, maybe that's because we brought up that topic and like my lenses started to see it everywhere. But like just yesterday, I believe I've received yet another just typical, newsletter from, at first that was from from Chamber of Commerce, and then that was from Hello Alice. Both of these newsletters very briefly talked about tariffs, but from two absolutely different angles. The first one talked about tariffs, sorry, as the opportunity for the small businesses to grow their business because there will be less competition and more opportunities, thankfully, to high tariffs. And on the opposite side, another newsletter shared this idea about tariffs, that small businesses will struggle because a lot of resources and assets they're using for the production are imported, and therefore the prices will come high, and that will increase a lot of issues. So, what's your take on that, folks? Can. I do know that Mark is posting something on LinkedIn. So, yeah.
Well, I will not pretend to be an expert on tariffs, but what I can read and what I can hear and what I can find is just a huge amount of mixed views on whether they're beneficial or not. I just was reading an article published by the Cato Institute this morning, and the summary on it is that uh, basically tariffs often fail to meet their objectives because of the unintended consequences that tariffs present. I'll give you an example. We've talked about pulling back the pharmaceuticals from China and the manufacture of some of the pharmaceuticals from China, and or imposing heavy tariffs on that. But the fact is that the other part of that is there's still a lot of other supplies that go into the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals that would not be necessarily part of the tariffs. And so for those organizations trying to pick up the manufacture of pharmaceuticals, they may still rely on foreign sources for some of the ingredients and products that go into it. So you end up with an attempt to pull it back and lower the cost, but there may be other things that are subject to the tariffs that would still be out there. And then I think the issue that we run into is, long-term studies are mixed on whether there's lasting benefits from tariffs. There may be an initial bump of optimism and enthusiasm about it, but then things kind of level out, and you don't always get the impact that you have planned to get by imposing tariffs. So I think that it's an open switch right now because we don't know what the tariffs look like. In one article, I read that the tariff would be like 60% for China and 20% for others. So again, I don't know what the policy is going to end up being, but then if the tariffs are high, people switch other ways to do things, and then you may or may from other importers. So I mean, it's a question of how broadly or how focused, and what that range looks like, and if there are substitution opportunities out there. For instance, I just read an article this morning that Vietnam stands to benefit from high tariffs on China.
I believe also India, most probably, not only Vietnam. There are tons of production and therefore import from India.
Yeah.
Latin America, I would imagine, that also can benefit out of it.
But the article focused on Vietnam as being having a free trade policy kind of approach, and I have access to transportation and so on and so forth that close proximity to China, so they still have access to some of the materials and so on and so forth. So again, it's unknown exactly what the impact would be, and I think a lot of people are trying to study it right now. And again, I can read, you all can read, and what the reports are, and it's all over the place.
Yeah, and I don't know. Honestly, the thing which bothers me, it's not only the question about substitution and import related, but I'm not sure. I mean, in the long run, maybe that will have positive impact on the production in the United States because there will be no substitute at the normal price, and therefore we will be forced to start more to open production in the United States. But from my understanding, this country spent years and years and years turning the overall economy from the production type of economy to the service and consuming type of economy, right? We tend to consume more and produce less, and we're okay with that. On the other hand, it seems like now we are trying to turn the wheels back and start to produce more. And I'm not sure whether, first of all, we're ready to do that. I mean, as a country, both physically and emotionally. And secondly, I'm not sure whether this movement will be possible within a very short period of a time. Because if you will apply tariffs, right, they will start essentially, or you will start to feel the impact of the tariffs implementation right away. And I'm really not sure if we will be able to switch the gear so fast. What's your take on that? I do understand that like it's not going to be the expert or something like that opinion. I'm just interested in your ideas.
Yeah. Um, I think the question is, so ultimately, one of the questions is will consumers benefit from the tariffs? Will the businesses benefit from the tariffs, and so on and so forth? The if we are serious about bringing all of that capability back on shore, I think you're right. There's going to be a huge investment required in our infrastructure and our capacities. And at the end of the day, the prevailing wisdom is that almost all tariffs end up being borne by the consumer in one form or fashion. So if we put tariffs on things and then also follow up with a massive effort to update facilities and capabilities and production plants and so on and so forth, that's going to increase costs as well. So it's hard for me to have a very strong opinion about the benefits and risks of the tariffs, but you could get into things like trade wars and retaliatory tariffs and so on and so forth. In some cases, for things that we really are really reliant on, and we end up not being able to get them at a reasonable price or at all. So you could end up with some negative
Well,
impacts.
from my understanding, that one of the and again, I might be wrong here, and I do not really want to dive into politics way too much. But from my understanding, this is one of the purposes of even of bringing this topic up to the public, like tariffs. There is a very specific goal of the tariffs, and that's China, not any country, but specifically China. And I'm not sure whether, again, that's going to have any
So,
positive impact on the United States.
so I am a fan, I guess, of trying to bring some of the manufacturing and production work back to the U.S. I think we are at risk at a different level with having our being solely reliable on some of our foreign suppliers and some that aren't always necessarily friendly for the essentials of how we're living, and that's not comfortable for me. So the idea of take tariffs out of it, if there is a program to bring things back through tax incentives and things like that, that to me makes a lot of sense, because we shouldn't be reliant on all of our essential medicines and other kinds of things on foreign producers. I mean, it's just not a good policy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here with you. And I also tend to believe that it is, well, there's a lot of sense in the idea of opening a little bit more manufacturing in United States, because not necessarily manufacturing should be solely huge productions, right? It still can be small businesses, and therefore that those can be small businesses which will becoming the base for the new job creating, right, and for the new opportunities. Not sure whether there are going to be a lot of workforce available for all these jobs, because we've talked about that previously a little bit, that there is this problem with the quite high unemployment rate, and on the other hand, a lot of small business owners cannot find enough employees, because there are types of jobs which people just don't want to do. And I'm not sure whether manufacturing will be the dream job in the nearest future. I mean, work in the manufacturing going to be the dream job for a lot of folks.
Ultimately, anything we do is not necessarily going to save money, not going to lower prices necessarily. It if we But if it's the policy to try to have more people be able to work in this country on things, and that has goodness in a overall economic flow perspective of having more people working, more tax revenues, more standard of living updates and so on and so forth. And the people that are people are struggling to try to get their footing around what do they do next, because there's a lot of folks that can't seem to get back into the job market the way they would like to. And then there's some, like you say, that don't really maybe do not want to work the way the traditional models worked. And so we have a lot of issues around, the economy and the health of the economy and how people survive in the economy it's a very complex issue, and tariffs alone are not going to do that. There's got to be a lot of other considerations for how we bring that back.
Yeah, that make a lot of sense. So, Mark, I know
Yeah.
that the article is up and running.
Well, I wanted to comment on tariffs a little bit, if I
Oh,
can,
yes, please.
because I do think this is an important topic, in the effects that it may have. I mean, there's still a lot of unknowns, right? I think there's a couple things that come into play that you often don't think about. If the new policies come into play and go into effect, the companies that are going to be able to move quickly are large corporations, because they have the financial resources, they have the internal skill sets, and they have people to move quickly.
Unwrap, what do you mean by move quickly?
Well, there's a lot of things to take into. So think about a small business for a second, okay? So if policies go through, and again, there's the devils are in the details, right? And we're talking about a foreign country in China, and what percentage of the goods that we import for them do we rely on, right? I don't know those numbers, but what I do know is that there's people have to think about like the cost management, right? Increase input costs. So if the tariffs affect me, I have to look for alternative resources, which could be other countries, right? Which is good. That's a positive. But how much time and effort does it take to find those resources? Nobody ever thinks about time and effort it takes to move, right? And when you have a smaller organization that doesn't have the internal skill sets, often they can't move as quick,
Yeah.
right? But the other thing is what's the cost if we do something ourselves? What's the cost? How does it affect our pricing strategies, right? Do I have the financial wherewithal to be able to absorb the cost of these tariffs? Because if what I'm importing goes up because I can't find alternative resources that I can trust to get us what we need as quick as we get it now, right? Can I sustain that increase while I determine, what our new pricing strategies are? And can my clients consume that new pricing strategy, right? There's things like supply chain adjustments, right? People don't think about that, or inventory management, shift in markets, target markets, product designs, people, long-term investment decisions. If people need to make an investment because, tariffs are going up and they have to find alternatives, it sounds good that maybe we'll buy more and do more here in the United States, which is great in theory. But if they need to make an investment to, add a manufacturing line that's something that they imported, and now they have to build, the infrastructure to now deliver it here in the United States, there's a lot of moving parts, right, to this. And big companies think 5 years down the road, right?
Well,
So
they
big
do have
companies,
resources. That's
well,
exactly
big
what.
companies have people in Washington that have their ear to the ground on
Oh, you're
changes.
talking about the big companies. Okay.
Okay, so large organizations have their ear to the ground, or people that watch government compliance and changes, and they can see changes coming in advance, so they can plan more, right? They can plan for these changes. They can plan for them financially. So they're already positioned that when the change occurs, they're already moving in that direction because they have a plan to move in that direction. You think about small companies. Small companies are still trying to figure out how to grow their revenue streams. still trying to figure out how to get financing, right? And more money to scale and grow. Companies that rely on metal overseas, well, where does our metal come from, right? China. Where else are you going to get that quickly? Well, everything today is made out of metal. The cost of making metal here in the United States is extremely expensive. Cost of employees, cost of benefits. There's so many moving parts to this that I think by the time everything gets in place, small businesses could go out of business because they can't adapt and move as quick, where large companies can because they're already planning for it, right? So
All small businesses or some types of small
I
businesses?
think it depends on the industry, and I think it depends on what products that they're looking for. So I give you a real life example. I always go back to my pizza business during the pandemic. Okay. Well, a lot of the cardboard boxes came from overseas. So when the pandemic hit, my pizzeria stayed open during the pandemic, right? We couldn't find pizza boxes here in the United States.
How so?
Because people that made pizza boxes, the cost of them were so darn high if they did, but they also, because they relied on the other countries to supply what goes into making a cardboard, we don't think about this stuff. My owner had difficulty finding pizza boxes. So how do you deliver a pizza? But the cost of the boxes went up because
How
the
up?
cost
Like
to
that
produce them
was
was higher.
dramatically?
What's that?
Was that dramatic? Like
It was a big problem. You don't think about it though.
no. I mean the price. How kind of? You mentioned that the price went up. Like up how?
Even if the price of something went up $1, okay, I just use round number. It goes up $1. In the pizza business, the margins are so thin already. That dollar is going to get passed on somewhere, right?
Well, yeah.
It's going to get passed on. So there's a domino effect to all of this, and who ultimately ends up paying is us, right? So I think I'm interested to see how it all plays out. The devils are in the details and the data. Because I don't know, Ken used a number of 60% from China, if that's the number. I don't know what all the products are that make up that 60% and what industries it makes up, right? But when I thought about the pandemic with my pizzeria and cardboard boxes, you'd think, oh my gosh, there's manufacturers here. They're going to be happy they can produce more cardboard boxes. But then you don't realize what goes into making the cardboard box. Let's look at Walmart. When you went to Walmart, there was no Gatorade on the shelves. None. Right? So you don't think about what goes into manufacturing the Gatorade bottle. What part of that Gatorade bottle, something comes somewhere else. Go ahead, Kat. But so that's what I mean. There's a huge effect.
Yeah, way too much of moving parts.
I think we learned pretty dramatically that the pandemic gave us an opportunity to understand supply chain issues and supply chain dependencies. It wasn't like the products weren't being made, but ships were stacked up at the harbors loaded with goods that couldn't get distributed. And so, you get into the situation of, yes, we want to make it here, but we may rely on a number of different sources that might not be able to get the raw materials to us to be able to do that. Or the raw materials, as Mark was saying, have increased. The other thing is, we know that lumber is an example of a product that has just skyrocketed with all the economic influences. But there are a lot of lumber facilities that I understand just had to go out of business during the pandemic, and that cut down the supply.
Yeah.
I think if you look at development, like the cost, I remember this a couple of years ago, a real estate developer was building a building, and most of the metals and iron came from overseas. And the cost was so high, they actually had to stop the construction because they had to go get more financing. So if they went to a bank and said it cost me $25 million to build this building, and all of a sudden the construction costs went up, because we rely on other countries for those raw materials, banks have to give more money. Now you have to prove to the bank again, right? So there's a domino effect to all of that, right? So what I'd like to see, and I don't know if this will ever happen, is if they do move in that direction, give organizations the data and say, we're increasing tariffs here on these products, right? And give the data to small business owners in advance so they can make better decisions faster. Help them make decisions faster. Give them the data, right? And say, look, out of 60%, we're increasing tariffs. This is how it's going to affect the products. Here's your alternatives. You can buy from these other countries. You can buy from these the distributors here in the United States. Give them the information.
I'm not sure whether government.
The data.
Government can, but like I'm not sure if they will bother to provide you, especially
my
the list
point.
of the possible substitutes. I would say that that's on you as the business owner.
I'm talking a perfect world, and the government has the data. The government has the data on pretty much everything, right? And that's how decisions are made. All I'm saying is help people make good business decisions by giving them certain information so they can move a little quicker, right? And I guess what I'm saying by that is if 60% of the products are coming from China into the United States, what products are they, right? What percentage of food, what percentage of metal, right? Here's the distributor, here's the manufacturers in the United States that make metal, right? People know some of that information, but if you can help them be more nimble, right? Like big corporations, because big corporations
how do you imagine that this whole thing can work? I mean, I cannot imagine that government gonna knock at every door and say, "Hey, hello, so you are producing pizza, and you're gonna have some issues with the pizza boxes. So here's where you can get it." I cannot even imagine that something like that will be possible.
So when you apply for a federal ID number, the government knows what your industry is. They know what you produce because you have to register.
They know
every business
your
has
code,
to register to do business, and they have that data of what you provide. Right?
Okay, but they have no idea what you're using. Maybe you're already using.
No, that's not what I'm saying. So here's the example I'll give. I'll go back to the pizza business. He didn't have to worry about pizza boxes. He could place his order, and he got them from a distributor. That distributor got them from overseas. They were always there in bulk, right? Because they were stored, because they got them from overseas. Now all of a sudden you don't have those. Oh my gosh, I don't know who else in the United States around me makes pizza boxes. So I have to look in all these little areas around New York State and figure out who manufactures pizza boxes. Do you know what a chore that was? To try to figure out who can make pizza boxes, right? However, we did find a manufacturer that works with cardboard, but he didn't have set up and the line to manufacture pizza boxes. So he had to change how he did business. There's a cost to that. And if there's a cost to that, that got passed on, right? Because I never made pizza boxes before. But so it did provide that manufacturer an opportunity to say, oh, it opened up a door to pizza boxes. But once things loosened up overseas, guess where the pizzeria went back to buying the pizza box because they were cheaper. Because that business that manufactures pizza boxes has to let all the pizzerias know that he now manufactures pizza boxes. There's a whole play behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not sure, to be totally honest, if this particular example can be totally applied on the tariff situation, because unlike COVID, if the tariffs will be applied, most probably they will have long-lasting effects, right? That's not something like, okay, in a year we are wrapping that stuff and we're just forgetting about it, like about the bad dream, like we've tried to do with the COVID, right? I'm not sure if that's going to be the play, but I do understand what you're talking about. On the other hand, how often do you think small business owners will go to the data agency like Risk Management Association? And there is a huge amount of data available out there. And you can get the benchmarks about your industry, location, you name it.
What percentage of businesses do you think actually know that there's resources out there like that for them?
Exactly. That's
That's
exactly
my
my
point.
point.
People need to know where to turn to get the information so they can make good decisions.
Okay, so how would you imagine that this can be even
I don't have a
possible?
good answer for you on how, if the government's going to play a role in how businesses make a decision, give enough information to make a good decision, right? Not at 100,000 feet, but give the devils are in the details. If people, I call it fine print, right? There's a lot of fine print. Does anybody ever read the fine print? No. They just say, oh, tariffs are going to be increased. It's going to affect us. And they have no clue how it's going to affect them because there's no details to it,
Absolutely, but
right?
again, I cannot imagine how exactly this can work out. We already have huge government, way too big in my humble opinion, and to pull up something like that, that's almost meant like open up, I don't know, schools,
I'm not
for
saying that they
business
can.
owners.
I'm not saying they can. The discussion is how are tariffs going to affect businesses,
Right.
And there's
right?
some, and there's some data out there from the 2018-2019 tariffs that they point to that demonstrate that the goals are often not met because other things come up that have to be accounted for, and ultimately, did they have the impact on the country you were trying to level the tariffs on, or did they end up just creating alternate supply chains that had to absorb all of that? And so again, part of the question is, what is the goal of the tariff? Is it punishment, or is it to actually bring jobs back onshore, or is it meant to lower our overall costs of stuff? I think we get into the sort of, and I don't want to get into it necessarily, but the political messaging versus the economic messaging of what the
I'm not
tariffs
sure
will
if you
do.
can split those two. It seems to me that there inevitable going to be a lot of intersection.
But the political side is there's a lot of emotion around this, right? And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is somewhat in the story that's being told. And then there's the empirical evidence of what's happened before. So we have access to studies about what's happened before, and it's not a complete up or down situation. There are benefits, there are costs, and there are impacts. And all I would say is, I think as we move into this realm, the tariffs potentially have a role. They always have a role, have had a role in some form or fashion. It's not new. It's a question of how do you align the tariffs that you want to put in with the outcome that you want to create, and what else could happen.
Yep.
So
All I'm saying, Yaryna, is when you make a change that has a drastic effect on businesses as a whole, how can you help them navigate through, right? So they can make good decisions so they don't go out of business or they don't lower their profit margins, right? Because inevitably what might happen with tariffs is if and again, I don't know the numbers, right? Big companies will be able to move quickly on it because they already have the data. They know what they're going to do. Big companies plan in advance, right? They know their next move no matter what. Small companies are trying to figure out, well, what's the government doing? And I'll wait until they do it to figure out what my next move is. And sometimes that next move, time, right? Time is really important. Small companies don't have time. Because if they increase their pricing, could they lose their clients, right? If they increase their business, if they increase their pricing, they could lose opportunities, right? Because they're outpriced, right? In a perfect world, if there's large corporations that benefit from this, could they subcontract work to smaller companies, right? So everybody wins. That's a possibility, right? You do see that happening where large corporations are getting opportunities and saying, we want to subcontract work to smaller companies, right? There's a domino effect. So there's a lot to it,
Yep,
but there's a lot of
absolutely.
unknowns.
So now we are getting back to no, 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 no topic. I went through the article. Communication. Sir,
Mark, you
would you
open.
like
Uh, take it
to
away,
Oh my
man.
gosh.
and you better give us the context. Who yelled at you?
My God. Okay.
She's enjoying this way too
I
much.
know she is, and
Oh,
this has put
yes.
me kind of in a hot seat in an awkward situation. Um,
It's like, being this little evil. Yes. There you go.
I already know that about you, Yaryna. Is you are a little evil. You like to stick the needle in a little bit
Oh
and
no,
pull.
that's the first of all,
Um,
that's not a needle, that's the
I
whole
know.
knife. And secondly, well,
I know.
come on.
All right, and Ken, he'll support this, right? Communication to me is everything. Very clear communication, right? Communication, expectations, follow through. I'll just give you an example. People do not realize when you run a business, and maybe they do. Some do, and some don't. And I can't do a broad stroke to that. Your suppliers and your clients, and even salespeople, right, um, are a form of advertising, right? And what I mean by that is I based on my relation, everything in life is relationships and communication. If there's a breakdown in communication, there's a lot of things that happen. You start to lose trust, you start to lose confidence, all of that, right? And I sometimes don't think, and I've had a lot of conversations with people that don't realize how the words they use can sting. Sometimes it might be strategic. Sometimes it just may be how they talk. And Ken and I talked about this before. People use words like I said, I already told you, like I mentioned. If you really go look at those words and the meaning, they're kind of offensive, right? I'm a grown adult. I heard you before, but did you ever think that when you say, like I said, I could come back and say, well, what you said wasn't very clear to me, right? We make assumptions on stuff, right? And that's why open lines of communication when you talk is extremely important, that you don't use words like, I already told you. Because somebody might say, no shit, you already told me, but I didn't understand what you meant, right? It could provoke a not so positive response. And that is what I call breakdown of communication, right? And I don't think that when people talk to each other that they realize how what you're saying is being received, right? Because in any space, whether it's HR, it's whatever, how you talk to somebody, everybody receives what you say differently, right? So I think it's very important that people communicate effectively with each other. That if they don't understand that somebody says, it's okay to say, can you kind of clarify that a little bit? Because I'm not 100% of what you mean, right? I had a text exchange with a client that I didn't think was very positive, right? And the response was, I already told you. And my response was, you're not my only client. I work with a lot of people, and right. So he promoted a negative response.
Yeah, that's interesting though. While you were sharing all these details, I did not know how popular that meme was in United States, but back in Ukraine, that was super popular meme. I don't know, maybe 10 plus years ago. So the whole idea of providing the feedback that the meaning of the word amazing in the United States will cover everything starting from the total shit to, oh, this is really great. And that so the whole idea of the meme was that, especially in the United States, uh like we're trying to use the more positive reinforcements and positive words in a way that you will never know the real feedback. You will always get that, oh, that was amazing, thank you so much for the great job. And getting that negative side in the communication, that's very interesting to me. And and a little bit weird that it is still appears in the business communication.
It, Ken and I say this all the time. nobody's that busy that they can't respond to something at some point. At some point, right? You might prioritize how you respond to somebody or when you respond to somebody, right? But we've become what I call an instant communication society, right? Text messaging, right? Text messaging. If I text you, how come I just texted you? Well, I'm in a conference call, right? I was in one situation where I got a phone call. I wasn't able to respond because I was on a Zoom call like this. And then I got an email and I'm on a Zoom call like this. And then I got a text message all within an hour, right? All within an hour. And my point is that we have to have respect for people's times, right? And we have to learn how to better communicate, whether it's through email, phone, or what have you. And I think when there's a breakdown in that communication, it causes animosity, lack of trust, lack of respect, right? We're not that busy that we can't respond in a professional way. Your suppliers, I've listened to one of my clients' manager respond to his supplier once, and I'm like, you realize that he might be the guy that brings you your stuff, but he's also the guy that's going to say, don't eat at that pizzeria because they're a jerk, right? Or if you think about when you go out in a social environment, this is a big one, and you say, what do you do? Where do you work? You could tell right off the bat whether or not they like it by how they respond, right? Because it's all in how you communicate from the top down to people. That communication develops a culture, a positive culture, right? A positive culture where if Ken's my boss, I'm not afraid to say something to Ken because he's created a platform to me to communicate what I think or feel because I trust that Ken's going to receive it. And then we're going to work through something together, right? Ken and I have that mutual respect. We've had great conversations where we've disagreed, but I respect what he's saying. But maybe I don't understand his point of view of, right? And I might ask for clarity. Tell me more. What do you mean? Right? And we do that very well. We don't always agree on things. We've had our little fun together, right? But communicate. I always equate everything to a marriage. If you don't have effective communication in your marriage, you're going to get divorced, right? Or your relationship's going to go farther apart if you don't communicate. A lot of people seek to respond than to actually listen to understand, right? So if I'm saying something, I can tell whether or not somebody wants to respond quickly. I can just tell by the look on their face. And I'm like, well, are they really hearing me? Because they're just responding to what I'm saying. But did they really hear what my message was or what I was trying to say? Most people are not what I call active listeners. Why? Because we're moving so fast paced today. That's what I mean by that. We're moving so fast because our to-do list is growing. We're being asked to do more with less, right? So we just move without actually hearing, right? And that's what go ahead, Ken. That's what I mean by communication.
No, I know this is your topic, but I'm going to go ahead and add some commentary as well. I wrote down several things that I think are really pertinent to this conversation about communication. One is being clear on your intention. As Mark said, I may have intended to just simply say something, but and leave it. I wasn't looking for more, but the way I said it may not generate that response. So a lot of times it's helpful to state your clear intentions. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. I just want to make sure that we're moving in the same direction. And if we're not, let's have a conversation about it and clear it up. So intention is really important, and it's important to understand people will hear different than what your intention was about a lot of times, right? Mark mentioned that he got these calls and these emails and these texts. If you have an urgent situation that you're sending it out, most likely Mark probably glanced at the text coming in, for instance, but he didn't have time. He didn't know if it was urgent. He didn't know anything about it. So if you have an early urgent, put it in the headline somewhere. Got a real issue, please call as soon as possible. And trust that person's going to do that, right? Because we all are in meetings constantly. We're all working on things that need our attention. And, good time management is you block out time, you work on stuff, and you kind of cut out everything else. But if I'm in the middle of something and I get a message that Mark has an urgent issue, I'm going to drop what I'm doing and call him.
But do not overuse that, because if you're going to receive tens,
you respect people's time to begin with. And then I think the other thing that's really important, and we do a lot of discussions about this. You mentioned earlier about small business owners finding help, right? There's generational implications of the communication, and how whether the generations communicate the same way between each other. So if you've got an older business owner and a younger staff, even the language that the younger staff is using these days is not familiar to the older person. It's just there's a whole level of language and shortcuts and everything else that the young folks use. I don't get. I have two sons that are 22 and 24, and they're recently out of college and working, and their language is different in a lot of ways than my language. And so that does introduce challenges, but it introduces that in the workplace as well. There's a lot of information out there that you can access as a business owner about how you communicate to different generations of workers.
That's a great point, Ken, because it's as we get older, we have to adapt to younger gen. You could still have, clarity and a vision and a mission and expectations, but how you communicate to the different generations is extremely important. You really can't do a broad stroke, because they don't. My son's 19. Whenever he talks to me, I'm like, tell me what you mean. I don't understand. Like, I'll say that to him a lot. But what's interesting is sometimes he can't really explain it. You're going to find this funny to what Ken's speaking about. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah. How we talk to teens. Okay. Is it helpful?
So I just started reading it. And I look at myself as a parent. Now, don't get me wrong. I've read a lot of books to how to communicate. And I don't always communicate effectively, because sometimes your emotion takes over. That's the key. Sometimes your emotions take over, right? And you don't realize that your emotions are taking over. Right? We have a saying when I worked with payroll and HR, it's not the intent of what you say, it's actually how it's received. Because you don't think your intent might be good, but the person sitting across from you might not receive it the way you intended it to be, right? Just like in our conversation a little bit about tariffs and the government, you took it, well, the government's hands, and I don't want more government, but that's not what I meant. Right? So I had to figure out how to better communicate what I really meant to you, because I wasn't saying I want more government hands in the decision making. I want them to provide more information so we can make better decisions. Right? But that was my lack of communication, because you received it different than what I was trying to say. That's not a bad thing, right? But it's really listening to how you received it and say, oh, I didn't do a good job explaining that, where that's not really what I meant. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And frankly, that's why I like the idea of being clear on your intention as part of the conversation. I mean, because just assuming people get your intent is often just wrong. And there can be a variety of reasons for it. There are emotions involved, the age involved, the circumstance. I mean, there's just a lot of reasons why people might not hear your message the way you wanted it. And sometimes you are absolutely clear, and they are absolutely clear on what you intended. I mean, you'll have those situations. The thing that Mark was talking about earlier, and I wanted to just mention it, there's 5 behaviors that Patrick Lencioni has published a book about. And it's really important for us to kind of constantly reference the idea that it starts with trust. Do you trust, each other in the conversation? And then understand that there's constructive conflict, meaning if you have a difference, how do you go about having that conversation, which is kind of like what Mark was saying. And then you're committing to things and so on and so forth. But the point is, it all starts with trust. I trust Mark is trying to do the right thing. I trust you're not trying to embarrass us on this call. But I trust.
Well, you can bet on that. Yep.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, but it starts with developing some level of trust in your relationships that say we're all here to try to
So
do
Matt,
this.
may ask you, if I may, the same question, but from slightly different perspective. You were talking more about internal communication. Now, how we can use all the same patterns building external communication, and I'm going to give you even extreme example of that. So I'm the fintech business owner, right? Which means that I'm going to need to work with a lot of financial institutions. When we're talking about community banks, oftentimes that can be family owned businesses where the granddad, started that businesses. And there is even oftentimes when the same folks who started businesses like 40 years ago still going to be managing the business. How would you brought AI ideas to this type of folks, having in mind building trust first of all?
So you hit on an important topic, whether you meant to or not. There's a cultural bias in our communication as well. We need to understand, is this say, take the bank, has it been around for 80 years and it came out of, an Italian family that immigrated and built it, having some context for what the culture of the organization is matters. So when you're talking to people that are like venture capitalists and so on, are they the younger venture capitalists who made a lot of money with a big deal that they sold and now they're investing in other organizations? Or is it an established firm that has a particular way of hearing about opportunities and the way they look at things? So having some context, and I don't know if I picked up correctly on all that, but I was just saying they come from different places sometimes, and people come from different places. And having some idea that Mark always says, I grew up, I wasn't in the service, but my dad was a Marine, so I kind of, understand what being in service means. I was in the service. I mean, and then the people we've been dealing with a lot have been a lot of people that have been in the service, and they have a certain culture and way of dealing with things that, might not work well with people that do not have a military background all the time. So it's just understanding, and frankly, the people that came out of the military have had this hierarchy in their minds of how they talk to people based on their training and their reinforcement. And a lot of that's even changing now with the younger generation of military people. But there's that framework that you can try to tap into.
You got to remember this when it comes to suppliers and clients, right? They have the ability to refer you. But if you don't treat a supplier well, if Yaryna is my supplier and I don't treat you well as somebody who provides funding for me, and I don't treat you with respect and I don't treat you well, your likelihood to want to refer somebody to me diminishes, right? Or if I hire a supplier to do a job for me, and my supplier is trying to reach out to me consistently and I don't respond to them, that gives you an idea of what they're like as a company. That if somebody asks me about that company, my first perception is they're not very responsive because they're not even responsive to me as a supplier of theirs, right? They only communicate to me when they want something from me, right? That's not a relationship, right? So I look at our relationship. You made a request for me to help you with something, and I haven't forgot that request, right? But you gave me a task and a to do, and it's on my to do list. So I have to really think through, which I gave you information on two people, right? But I have to really do so. I got to go back to my archives of people that I might have interaction with that's not right at my fingertips,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
that's a to do. That's a task, but it's on my to do list, right? Haven't forgotten about it, right? And that's me communicating to you that, Yaryna, I haven't forgotten about you, right? I know what your request is. I promise you I'm still thinking about it, right? It's just communication. That's respect. That's what I think's lost today is respect for each other, right?
Okay,
Is it
let me brought up the different needle or a knife, because I'm pulling this topic very often, and this is like super connected to the respect. It seems to me that we're in overall, and I'm not talking only about United States or whatever, in overall, at some moment of a time, we forgot what does it mean to be adult. I don't know what happened, but it
well,
feels me so.
it's we're being programmed because it's all we see. Let's knock people down, not build them up, right? Let's knock people down and not build people up. It's all communication. I respect Ken. Do I always agree with what Ken says? No, but he doesn't always agree with me either. But we always find a common ground because we have respect
But that's
for
being
each other.
adult.
Right.
I mean, for me, that's being adult. Be able to respect someone else's opinion, no matter whether you agree with that or not.
Let, and I'll give you another example after Ken.
I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish your example, and
No,
then I'll come
the other example, and well, I don't want you to lose the thought, Ken, because
in. You know,
it's on
it'll
what we're
go away.
talking about. So I don't want you to lose that thought.
My brain doesn't hold on to these things. No, I was just going to say one of the things that I think is helpful to avoid potentially conflicts that are not productive is to stop. Sometimes when people say something or send something in an email, rather than immediately react with an emotional response because it pissed you off, is stop, think it through, cool off, and then create your response where you try to form it in a fashion where it's more productive than destructive. And that's really important because people snap right back at you with something and it
It's
may not have been intended to be something that was insulting.
and he's making a good point, and he's actually giving a real life example right now. Okay, and he might not say it because he's very professional and respectful, right? And he's given a real life example, and it's a great example and a meaningful example. And that's where I go back to it's not how it was intended, but how it's received. And there are people that are great writers that use words really well, right? And somebody may take those words and misinterpret them and then react to it. And he's absolutely right. Eh, we've relied on email as the main method of communication for everything. That if we're going to talk about important things, they should be via the phone. That's kind of a lost art today, right? Everybody will say, well, I shot you an email. Well, I get 250 emails within 6 hours, and I have to look at them all. If it's important, call me. But we say, well, I shot the email off. Well, I didn't see the email or went to space. We assume that because somebody sent an email that it's already been read, right? Because we rely on that as the method of communication, why it's easy.
Well, that's another like point of view to that. I really don't like when someone's called me. I really, really, really don't like. My natural response would be, why haven't you shoot me an email? Text me. Why are you calling me? And the
That's the
problem is
generational
gonna be,
gap.
yeah, like
See,
the
see this
That's
little
the
thing here?
generational gap.
yeah. And like there is like two major reasons for that. The first one is telemarketing. I was so highly attacked and like so heavily attacked by all this like telemarketing that I was forced to change my phone number just to stop it. And secondly, exactly to the example you've shared before, I'm in the middle of something. Most probably, when you will try to call me, I'm going to be in the middle of recording Zoom call. Most probably, I'm in the middle of another call. So if you will try to call me, this is essentially like an interruption. So I will try to avoid it, and I'm going to put my phone on the do not disturb mode. So for me, if someone's calling me, is to say to me that, someone died, get into a car crash, or I won a million. And to which of the topic do you think I will believe in, right?
That's a huge generational gap right there.
So I have to share this with you. My wife and I set up a system. When I was working my corporate roles, I was back to back meetings all day long, and it was a very stressful environment. But if she called me, I most likely didn't pick up. So we set up a system that says, if you call me twice and I haven't picked up, you call me right back, and I'll know it's important, it's urgent. And we just set up a little communication system that says, I'm not going to pick up, generally speaking, but if you call me twice in a row in quick succession, that's a code to say I need to take a break and call you. So something like that. But people don't always think about little helpful systems like that. And I wanted to share something with you. And this is something that Mark highlighted to me a few weeks back. It was a post on LinkedIn by Justin Wright, and he had a chart that said, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, defining traits, core values, work style, communication preferences, preferred benefits, how to lead. It was a wonderful chart, and I applaud his work on it, or I assume that's his work. That it was really, I keep it out as a reference point, to be honest with you, because I'm always thinking about, if I'm communicating, I do a lot of work, or we try to work with a lot of different people, but I'm moving towards working more with business owners who are entering the end of their life cycle. In other words, getting ready to exit. Typically, baby boomers, Gen X's, this group, and understanding how they want to communicate and what I need to is exactly helpful, because I want to make sure I'm phrasing my messaging and my words, as Mark said. The words are important. Phrasing things in a way that's going to relate to them, and not sound insulting or dismissive or any of those negative kinds of things, but very respectful, very complimentary, whatever. But the point is trying to understand how to talk to that group.
Yep.
In some form or fashion.
And I do want to give two more examples that I think are very important to the discussion of, how you communicate, how often you communicate to suppliers, clients, or whatever. I'll give you two real examples. And one of them has to do with what Ken and I do with our clients. Our clients look to us to help bring awareness to who they are to organizations across the United States through multiple channels of communication. Okay? Consistent communication. I call it plant the seed, water a tree, right? If you consistently communicate, it then becomes about timing. Okay? About timing, because you're consistently in front of somebody. But if that company is looking to you to help open the door to big companies that want to do business with a diverse supplier, okay? And this comes down to perception. If we're communicating with our client and in that email is a question. So just so everybody knows, when I write emails, there's always a question in the email. Want to know why?
Yeah, that's your cliffhanger.
It is the cliff. Well, number one, I want to know if you read the email, because there's a question at the end, right? And the question is to see if somebody's going to respond. And did you really read the email? And by the way, in the subject line, I don't just put blanket stuff. Ken and I put urgent or whatever. We put stuff in the subject line that makes you want to read it, right? But my point is if your client doesn't respond to you for 3 or 4 weeks, and you're trying to communicate for them for a reason, and they don't respond to you, why would we as an organization want to open the door to a big corporate company? Because if you can't respond to us, my perception is that you're just going to respond to the corporate company, right? Communication should be equal across the board. If you have people helping you, you should communicate. If you have people that you have corporate companies that want to use you, you have to be attentive and responsive, right? Being responsive is extremely important, right? If I submitted something to you and you didn't respond to me in a month, I'm like, well, okay, how efficient is she, right? Perception. Our real life example that I'll give, and the company remain nameless, somebody complained to me that they didn't know where to turn for funding in grants. And I referred you. And this person came to me, talked to me for an hour, wasted an hour of my time, which, by the way, I'm a client of his because he does work for me. So I went to solve his problem, referred him to you. Do you know he still hasn't responded to my email and or phone call back, nor has he responded to you? How much do I want to help him grow his business when he tasked me with doing something for him? We did it and he's not responsive to me. He took all of my time, but he has no consideration for my time. And excuses will be made. I was busy. I didn't see it. Right? You'll give me all the excuse why you didn't communicate back to me, but that's an excuse. You asked for my help. I got it for you, but then became non-responsive. If he found an alternative source, he should say, Mark, I found something. Thanks very much. Right? Common courtesy, professionalism. That's what I mean by that.
Yep. And on this very teacher-ish note, let me wrap this episode up. Thank you so much, guys. No jokes. Like it's really important, and you're absolutely right here to see the difference in generations, because sometimes we tend to forget about it. Sometimes we tend to forget. And yet another example, from my perspective, getting like a little bit back to the topic you've just mentioned, Mark, about this guy who didn't respond. Sometimes, I don't know if that happened to you. I assume that most probably not super often, but sometimes for me it can be the real life situation when I'm getting so many emails, uh, and there is this email that I really need to think about how to address it, and then I forgot about it. It just slipped out of my plate, and 2 weeks later it is still marked with the red flag on my like inbox, and I found that email. And sometimes I feel very hard, just even to start addressing the email, something like, so what should I say? I totally forgot about you. My apologies. And by the way, I still do not have good answer, because since I forgot about you, I haven't time to thought properly about what you asked me. So please wait another 2 weeks, and most probably, to be totally honest, I will still forget about you. That's not the answer you want to give. So you're not answering and waiting until.
See, I have a slightly different perspective on this, perhaps. I don't have any problem admitting I messed up.
Oh, that's not about that. Like, I have problem
No,
admit that I'm messed up. It's just, but you have to bring
no.
some
But to
value.
that person,
Oh,
that
absolutely.
I messed up. I made a mistake. I own it. Let me fix it.
I agree with Ken, Yaryna, and again, I think this is a generational thing. I do, because I see it in my kids. When my kids make a mistake, they're like embarrassed, right? They don't want to admit that they made a mistake. I think it's just like in anything, in any relationship. We're not perfect people, and I think good people with big hearts are genuinely give people grace. Like if this was a habitual thing that you do, then that's different. But if you honestly just forgot, I think what Ken said is absolutely right. And it's like, Ken, I'm embarrassed. I want to apologize to you. I absolutely forgot. No excuse. I'm working on it right now. I don't have an answer yet for you, but I'm working through it and I will get back to you. And you just make it a priority.
I call that accountability.
Yeah, 100%.
It's being accountable. Another word for it is authorship. I'm creating the reality, and if no one else, that's me, and I take accountability for it.
I think it comes to your belief systems, Yaryna. Ken and I talk about this before. I used to do this with sales managers and salespeople, and I still do this today. And you might laugh at this, but it's how I hold myself accountable. At the end of the day, I go and I'm in the mirror getting ready for bed. I'll look in the mirror and say, was I the best husband I could be today? Yes or no? Was I the best dad that I could be today? Yes or no? They're yes or no questions. Was I the best partner today to Ken, Paul, and our team? And did I do everything that I promised I would do for our clients today? Yes or no? If I can look myself in the mirror and lie to myself, you'd lie to anybody, right? I call it truth. It's my truth. Sometimes I go on, no, I wasn't the best person today with my partners. I didn't listen very well to Ken today when he was saying something. I was short with him or whatever. That has happened. That's not his fault. That's mine, right? That's me holding me accountable to what I believe I should be doing for Ken as a relationship with him or Paul or the other people on our team and you or whoever. I do that still today.
That's great stuff. I'm really going to need to test it because I assume that there are going to be a
You might
lot of
not like the
questions.
answer, Yaryna.
Of course,
You
I
might
won't.
not like the answer, right? Because
It seems to me that yes.
this is how much I love Ken, because the example he gave in an email was an exchange that him and I had way back. It was a long time ago. I'm the one who reacted emotionally. That email
Who
came
would have
across,
thought?
right? Look, at the end of the day, nobody's perfect. I give myself grace because I'm not perfect, and I learn all the time. So that exchange was between him and I did react emotionally, and then he reacted emotionally. Then we let the dust settle, and we picked up the phone and talked to each other. And then I'm sorry, I hugged it, right? We hugged it out, right? Grown men, professional. But at the end of the day, I went back and I said, like, man, I was a jerk today. Why was I a jerk today? Well, I'm human, right? And that's why giving grace, like Ken said, give yourself some grace. You are human.
Yep. Well, that is the note when we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, guys, for being with me today. As always, you are amazing. The most handsome, wise, la 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 la. You pick the word, you can create the whole list, and I will just say it. How about that?
You're putting that out on LinkedIn?
For sure I will. The hell I will. I'm gonna do, the short, the minute, the minute of glory.
So you're putting out that handsome part, right? Just that little clip?
Yeah, sure thing. No worries. And trust me on that. I'm also gonna put that question. Are you gonna put it on LinkedIn? It's gonna be there.
Yaryna, thank you for all you do. I think
Thank
you're a
you.
great resource for people in what you do through NanaFund. And I'm going to make a plug for you that if people aren't following you on LinkedIn and your post, they should. They should follow you. They should really look at NanaFund and what it does. I think it's pretty powerful if somebody takes a chance to look at it.
Thank you so much.